our virtual meetup here. So yeah, again, thanks and honored to be here. So my name is Mohit. Those of you who do not know me, I work as a lead developer evangelist here at Salesforce. And my primary role here at Salesforce is, take the latest innovations that we are doing here at Salesforce and open up with the community, take feedback from them, and circle back to the product teams here at Salesforce. So that's the role with evangelists. So let's get started with today's session. So today we're going to talk about how you can enhance your Salesforce development productivity with the modern developer toolings that we give. Now, because it is a Salesforce presentation and I have access to so many information from product teams on upcoming roadmaps, I may make any forward-looking statements. But because we are a publicly traded company, please do not make any purchasing decisions based on the forward-looking statements that we say. Always make decisions based on the current offerings of the product. Okay, so with that, let's get started with Salesforce DX. Now, Salesforce DX, right? So the reason why I have few slides. Actually, the way I would like to go is quickly run through the slides and then actually get into show and tell and showcase a lot of the features that we have rather than just speaking through the slides. But I thought since a lot of you some of you might be familiar with Salesforce DX and CLI and tools, right? For some of you it might be a new. So I thought I'll start with definitions for Salesforce DX, what it is, and so Salesforce DX is an umbrella term. That's one of the things I always tell people is like, it's not it's not a pack that you should adopt. It's not a pack that you should adopt everything. You are free to actually adopt specific tools, individual tools. So what are the individual tools here that we have at Salesforce Developer Experience? So first one is Developer Hub. So this is enabled in your production. So if you go to set up in your production orgs, you will see something called as Dev Hub. Now this allows you to do certain things. It allows you to create scratch orgs. I'll talk about what is scratch orgs in a while here. It allows you to take advantage of packaging. Now, when I say packaging, primarily it was meant for ISV sort of applications or managed package applications. If some of you are working for ISV are already familiar with what is managed package application, etc. But with second generation packaging, right, we bring that packaging technology to SI vendors as well, meaning everyone can use that packaging. It's no more limited to ISVs. So obviously there's something called a second generation managed package that is specific to ISV sort of applications. But for your something called as unlock packages. So we bring that technology packaging to our entire community here. And then what else we have? So we have Salesforce CLI. So Salesforce CLI is one of the tools that if you're a developer or an admin, I strongly recommend that you actually install this tool, get yourself familiar with it. We will see some of the commands today. I'll talk through the power of the Salesforce CLI. But the key message with Salesforce CLI is it's flexible in the sense that it can work with bash scripts, it can work with your Windows PowerShell, it can work in your CI/CD automation. That's what flexible means here. It is available for any sort of tool, and that's why it's so much of flexibility. It's scriptable. We will see that. I'll show you some scripts. You can write shell script, you can write PowerShell scripts. You can write bash. It's completely scriptable. That's the core feature set of Salesforce CLI. And also, it is a command line tool essentially to interact with any Salesforce org. That is, you can establish connection with your Salesforce environment, and you can do pretty cool stuff with it. In fact, you can access any APIs of Salesforce, and that's where this whole ecosystem of plugins come into picture. Where we provide a lot of commands to Salesforce CLI. We provide a user interface on top of it through Visual Studio Extension Pack that I'll talk about. But the idea with Salesforce CLI is it's open. We are soon going to be open sourcing that, which means every part of the code that we have will be on the GitHub. And the core advantage with the Salesforce CLI, as I said, is it has a plugin ecosystem around it. That means if something is not provided by Salesforce CLI and you want to sort of work, like whether it may be metadata or any other operations with Salesforce that's not supported with the Salesforce CLI today out of box, it's a platform in itself. That is, you can create your own plugins, you can write your own stuff. And community has already built a lot of plugins. I can show you some of the examples today, and we can go through that. But the core idea of Salesforce CLI is, again, flexible, scriptable command line utility to work with any Salesforce org. We'll take a look at the demo of it short while. And then lastly, and this is again not mandatory. I know a lot of you use different text editors, right? But at Salesforce, we recommend that you use Visual Studio Code as the editor. And the reason why we say Visual Studio Code is because obviously, we have built our own Salesforce extension pack on Visual Studio Code, but Visual Studio Code itself is built in open. That means, if you go to Git, you can find the code for whole Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio Code has a similar ecosystem. That means, whether you're writing Python or whether you're writing, Java or any other language, you will see lots of extensions around. Whether you're writing Node or JavaScript, whether you're doing web development, whether you're doing Linux development, anything like that, right? So Visual Studio has this whole ecosystem of extensions and plugins, and it is also open. Anybody can build extension. That is the other power of Salesforce, not Salesforce, sorry, the Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. So Salesforce has adopted this as a default support tool. But really, Salesforce CLI provides you the API. Visual Studio Code is our UI on top of those APIs that Salesforce CLI provides. Okay, so that's in a nutshell what Salesforce DX is. Like when you hear Salesforce DX, right? Usually you are sort of thinking towards, okay, I need Scratch org now. I need to worry about packaging, to adopt this. But really, that's not the thing here. You can adopt any of these tools independently. Obviously, the Salesforce Visual Studio Code extension pack depends on Salesforce CLI. So I would say like Salesforce CLI is key here. Like if you're not adopting anything at this point, right? If you're doing in Developer Console, I strongly suggest that you take a look at Salesforce CLI and start working with some of the commands here to get a view of it, right? Again, I want to just run through these slides real quickly because we want to really get into the core aspect of it, right? So as you can see, like Salesforce CLI, right, has a lot of these commands. And one thing I want to talk about here is Salesforce CLI is built on top of Oak Cliff. Okay, so what is an Oak Cliff? So Oak Cliff is our open source framework. Again, it's open source. When I say open source, again, it's not Salesforce specific here. It's open source, meaning it's available for anyone, irrespective of the technology here. But the idea with the Oak Cliff is you can build any command line interface. Let's say you have an application, you have built some APIs, and you want to provide a command line interface over that. Go to Oak Cliff and check it out how to sort of build command line tools with Oak Cliff. And what Salesforce CLI has done is we have sort of used Oak Cliff to build our Salesforce CLI. So again, if you're familiar with Heroku CLI is built with Oak Cliff. Oak Cliff is kind of framework to build all the CLI tools. It's not only the framework. There are so many frameworks out there, but at Salesforce, like we use Oak Cliff. So Oak Cliff builds Salesforce CLI and all other tools, right? All other CLI utilities that you might see is built on top of Salesforce CLI, right? So Oak Cliff is the framework. Then you build Salesforce CLI. Salesforce CLI becomes framework for other CLIs. For example, if you have worked with Salesforce Instant Analytics product, which now is called Tableau CRM, so they have their own CLI plugin, right? We have an ISV team which has their own CLI plugin. We have Salesforce Scanner team which builds these scanner tools to scan your code. That's itself is a Salesforce CLI plugin, right? So you understand that plugin is like an ecosystem that we have created around Salesforce CLI. So Salesforce CLI is the core dependency for that. And again, these slides, and I'll talk about version control. We'll come back to that later. But before that, let's actually get into some demos and seeing what Salesforce CLI is, okay? So to install Salesforce CLI, right? So if you're a developer, right, irrespective of whether you have scratch orgs, whether you have developer orgs, or you're working in sandboxes, or we manage production orgs. Irrespective of that, first thing I strongly recommend is you install Salesforce CLI, and play with it, because it can really sort of help you in a lot of different things, and we'll see what those different things are. Some of them is documented here, like for example synchronizing source from your org. In other terms, this is like development and deployment, right? So if you have built something, you want to move changes from one org to another org, there are commands that are there. If you want to create a sandbox, you can do that. If you want to export data, you can do that. You want to create packages, write test or scaffold testing, all of this you can do that to Salesforce CLI. So depending on the operating system, whether you are using Mac or Windows or Debian or Ubuntu, you can easily go and install from this link, developer.salesforce.com/tools/sfdxcli. In fact, if you say sfdxcli in the Google, it will show you the tool. Okay. Now let's get to what are the command sets that are provided, right? So for that, I'll go to the terminal. I'm assuming that a lot of you are developers, and a lot of you are admins or business consultants, right? So again, CLI and commands and all these things are meant primarily for developers, right? But I would strongly encourage, even if you're an admin, spend a day or two trying to play with this. Create a developer org, and connect your Salesforce CLI to that org, and then try to sort of work through it, meaning try to experiment with some of the commands. You'll see that it's not that difficult to write these commands or remember these commands. And again, you don't have to remember these commands, because I'm going to show you how you can get to the documentation and all. Okay. So far so clear. Any questions before we jump into some of the demo aspects of it? Anybody, if you want to unmute the mic and say.
I think we are good, Mohit. Probably we'll ask people to share questions in the chat. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Share questions. We'll pick up at the end. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
So once you have installed, sorry. Okay. So once you've installed Salesforce DX, right, you can make sure that the installation went fine by doing something like SFDX version. Okay. So once you do SFDX version, you will see this SFDX CLI. It will say 7.7, 7.0, right? It will also tell which version of the node it's using. Okay. So node becomes very critical. I'll tell you, why I also recommend that if you're a Salesforce developer, start working with JavaScript a bit more and Node, because Node is becoming very critical to all of our developer tools. Not only developer tools, in fact, some of the technologies that we are building here, like Salesforce functions, all the, if you know at least one language like Node, you can build microservices on Heroku, etc. Now, so once you have installed Salesforce DX, you say SFDX version, you will see the Salesforce CLI / whatever the version it is. Now, one of the very useful commands in SFDX that you should know is SFDX help. Okay. So once you do a help on this, it will tell you all the commands, that we provide you. Now, I've also installed some plugins. And again, plugin installation is very simple. You say SFDX plugins install, and then put the name of the plugin. Like, for example, I have my own plugin that I've built. It's called MoreEX plugin. So this is how you just install a plugin. Okay. And then once you have these plugins, you can see them by typing SFDX plugins. It will tell you all the plugins that has. And I'll talk more about what these plugins are, etc. But remember the command SFDX help, because that's going to help you in documentation. So let's take a simple example, right? So let's assume that I have the CLI, right? And I want to explore, how do I authenticate my org with the Salesforce CLI? Now, the question is, why would I even authenticate my org with the Salesforce CLI, right? Because that is how you authorize your command line terminal to say that, yeah, you can take the data and the metadata from my org. Okay. So let's explore a simple thing of, okay, how do we learn about these commands, right? So for example, I see all these topics, right? Like auth. So it says authorize an org for use with Salesforce CLI. So it sounds like this is what I need, right? So what I do is I say sfdx and I say auth, right? And I do a help on this. So look at this, right? So now it says, okay, so we have these 4 different types of ways you can authorize your environment, right? Now let's say I'm interested in, and if you know OAuth, this is all OAuth flow. Like for example, this is device OAuth flow, this is jot token flow, this is refresh token flow, and uses an auth URL. This is web-based flow. So this is all a way to authorize it, right? So let's say I'm interested in the auth web command. So I do auth web, and then I do one help on this again. Okay. So now this will tell me that, okay, you know what? So you have 2 more commands like auth list. That's going to list all your authorizations. Log out of your authorization org, right? But here's your command. So you will say auth web, right? And here's your command auth web login. So this is how you authorize your Salesforce org by opening a browser. So you can log in into salesforce.com. Okay, so this is how you explore. Basically, it's very simple. Any command that you want to explore, like for example, I want to explore force commands, right? I say force help, and you'll see all the commands. Like for example, you might be confused that we have the auth command again in the force namespace, but we are actually breaking that up. We are in the process of breaking that up. That's why you see auth command. We want to get rid of the force from a lot of the commands. Actually, we want to get rid of that word force. So the work has already started on that. But yeah, this is how you explore. Like for example, if you want to do force data commands and want to explore what these data commands are, you do sfdx force data help, right? So you see you have suckle, you have data tree, right? So that is what a Salesforce CLI does. It basically gives you all the commands to interact with Salesforce org. Now let's take an example. Let's take an example of how to work with Salesforce CLI alone, and how to sort of work on a project. So we'll take a scenario where let's assume that you have a developer environment, okay, and let's say that you want to fetch the metadata from that developer environment to your your local machine, that is your laptop, so that you can view the metadata and the code that you have built in the org. Okay, let's take an example how to do that, and this is one of the things that a lot of us ask. And again, first I want to show that you can do all of this without needing a editor like VS Code. But we will see how the VS Code sort of simplifies the whole development, right? So the story that we are trying to do or work out in this next 10 minutes is how can we authorize on our org against a developer org, and then how can we pull the metadata from the developer org so that I can view that metadata in my local machine, and I can view all the files. Okay, so let's see. So for that, let me first create a directory. So I want to create a directory. I want to say desktop. This is where, okay, I misspelled the desktop. Okay, now let's make a directory. So let's create a directory. Let's call it as, what do we want to call it as? Sample project. Let's say sample project. Now cd into that sample project. Now again, if you're not familiar with these commands, spend some time on learning some of these commands, like how do you create a directory, how do you create a how do you cd into a directory, all fundamentals. Very important when you're working with command line, right? So now the next thing I want to do is, so I'm in the sample project, right, directory. Now the next thing I want to do is obviously I want to authenticate, right? So before authenticate, I want to create a scaffold project. Now, what is a scaffold project? In any software, project, right, or in any application that you build, whether you're building again Node and Salesforce application or any application. It's essentially a bunch of files, right? And it's organized in specific folder format. And you can handcraft all those things, right? But when you have like tens of files, handcrafting is not easy, right? So that's why we have technique called scaffolding, where you generally have a tool like a CLI tool. If you're building a Node project, it's same. You have npm to scaffold your project. If you're building a Java project, it's same. You have Maven's commands to sort of scaffold a project. Similarly, in Salesforce world, we have a project commands to scaffold. Commands are sfdx force project, right? And let's do a help on this. Okay, so we're gonna do a force create, okay, because we are creating a new project here. Let's do a help on this. Again, I'm just showing how we can create these, right? So just take a simple example. We give you examples as well. Let's take a simple example of the first one where we say project name, right? Say project name. Did we call it a sample app? Let's say sample app is our project name. So now I want to create a scaffold. Okay. Now creating a scaffold, right? We give you so many templates. For example, by default, it is a standard template. But let's say you are creating an analytics project. You can put that T template and say analytics, right? And there's also an empty template. So empty template is so with standard template, what we do is we give you a lot of other tools, like Prettier for formatting your code. There's the whole project.json that automatically gets generated, and there's a bunch of things that we give you in the project scaffold. So let's choose standard for now, and it's the default. Let's create one. So now what's this gonna? So you see, so this created, if you look at it, right? So this created a sample project. Essentially, it created in this directory, and then it created. What else did it create? So it created the sample app folder. It created a README file. It created, some VS Code setting files. It has a default folder for Aura LWC. It has a script folder for writing our SOCL. It has ESLint and git ignore for ignoring the files. It has Prettier to format your code. It has package.json, which has some tool specific information, right? So it created all of these, and we can in fact cd into the sample project. We can cd into that. I think it's called sample app. cd into that, and I have a shortcut to say code space dot that opens this in a VS Code, so we can visualize the tree here, right? So as I said, it created a scaffold, and nothing is there at this point, right? There's nothing here at this point because again, we have not authorized this to the information here. And if you have an existing project, right? A lot of people are like, if I have an existing project that's not in the source format here, right? It's very easy actually to convert the source formats, from MD API. So usually we had this MD API format, which had, so I'll talk a bit about those source formats, right? So let's talk a bit about source formats before we go further into this. So again, Google is our best help here. So let's Google source format, right? Source format, Salesforce DX. So what did we change with the source format? So earlier, if you know Salesforce projects, right, your projects are basically, you have an object folder and then you have .object file, which has a big information in it, right? So that's the previous format, right? Now with Salesforce DX format, we still call that Salesforce DX format? Yes. So with Salesforce DX format, right, we broke it further. Like, for example, if you're in your previous format, right, an object folder means it has an object, right? It has an object folder, and then it has this account object, and then it has this meta XML, and it'll have fields, list views, web links, record types, everything all collected in that one single XML file. And that's a lot, that's a lot to maintain, version, etc. It becomes very different. And that's why we are starting to decompose a lot of this. We have a strategy in place for a lot of metadata, like objects, right? So in objects, you will see that now the fields will be in its separate metadata folder, list view will be in its own folder, web links will be in its own folder. Similarly, static resources, right? If you work with static resources, right, they are a binary zip file. Now, it's very hard to work with binary zip files in editors. That's why what we do is we have the static resources, a new decomposed format where it's expanded now, and unzipping, zipping, everything, we take care of it, right? So we have, and similarly, we have Lightning Web Components and Experience Bundle for Lightning communities. If you're building communities project, right, it's a site. Previously, we have this network and sites metadata. The site metadata is a binary file, which is hard to work, which is hard to version in your source control. So that's why we have this experience bundles, right? Similarly, for documents, we organize them neatly into folders, and we are in process of actually exploring other ways to break other metadata, like, for example, permission sets, probably, because they're a huge metadata file, which might not be easier to work with, right? So that's the Salesforce DX source format, right? So if you have a project, I strongly recommend that you move from, one monolith XML packets to a smaller packets, or a Salesforce DX project source and the source format. So you might ask me, like, okay, I already have these projects in the Git, and it's already like source folder, and there's no force app or main or default folders, etc. Like, how do I do that, right? So there's a command called MD API. Let me show you. So there's a command called if you go to I think it's called force source. I think it's called force source convert command. So explore force source convert command. It allows you to, take okay, so force source convert, right? I think the source convert command, essentially, it allows you to convert. So this command allows you to convert from source to the MD API. Actually, you should be using this one, MD API convert command. So use MD API convert command to convert metadata into source format, right? So if you want to convert your MD API code, right, into source format, use this one. So let's do a help on this. So this command basically allows you to convert your metadata, right, into the source format. Okay, so if you have a project locally, right, you just put the path of the SRC folder, and then you say output to a force main app folder, and it'll automatically convert your project, right? But if you do not have anything, so this example that I'm showing is assuming you do not have anything today, like you don't have source control, you don't version your code, which is very common. Let's be frank on that. Like, it's very common to, because we never thought about source-driven development for Salesforce application before. It was all developer console. You build everything in the org, because a lot of things can be done with clicks and points these days, right? So you build everything in the org, your metadata sits in the org, use change sets to deploy, right? Which is totally fine, but versioning it makes it like really easier. You don't have to manually track that these are the changes that you did, etc. If you have a large project with lots of developers, it becomes a nightmare, if you are still using org-based development, because you might have colleagues overriding your code, etc. Right? So that's why it's source-driven development, right? So let's get on to our activity. So what we were doing here was to authorize, right? I was talking about how do we sort of authorize the Salesforce project here. So let's authorize. So easiest way to authorize this project is by using that auth command, force auth web login command. I think it was force auth web login. Again, notice I don't remember the commands, So what I'm doing is I'm taking the help. The help has, really a good way to help me do this, right? So by default, right, if I do a web login by default, it usually what it does usually is it will log in with production, that is login.salesforce.com. Now, if you need to go with sandbox, just put an -r and put the test.salesforce.com. Now, the org that I have is a developer org. So I'm going to try doing, or I'm going to not use that R flag because I know that by default it goes to login.salesforce.com. Now, if you have a specific domain and your IT has blocked that you log in only from that specific domain, then you just specify your domain name in that R, in that instance URL. It could be just a domain URL. Anyway, so we go here and say login. Now I want to log in using, and I also want to set that as my default org. So I'll use .s here because I want to set the default org. Also, we can do an alias on it. Now, what alias allows us to do is with the alias, right, it becomes very easy. I don't have to remember that long username of the user that I have, right? So I'm going to say, our demo org, this is a demo org, that's my alias. It makes it very easier later to use this alias in lots of the commands, okay? So let's see this. So what I'm doing here is authorizing the org so that I can retrieve the metadata. Okay. So let's go here. Now it will open up the browser. It will open up the browser here, yeah, it'll open up the browser where you can put the credentials. Let me see if I have the credentials. I don't remember which org I was working, but definitely this is not the one. Yeah, let's just pick one of these arcs and see what we can do. So let's say I want to pick this arc. Let me pick this arc. This is fine. So I log in, and then yeah. So once I log in, you should see a success message saying it's successfully authorized. And this is where it becomes more powerful because now this specific project is connected to this specific org. So now I can, do a lot of things with this. Like, for example, I can insert data into this org. I can pull code from this org. I can pull metadata from this org. I can create packages. I can create scratch orgs linked to this dev hub. There's so many things I can do. Okay, so now let's see if I have some metadata here. Hopefully these are not packaged metadata. Okay, so it looks like these are packaged metadata. Anyways, yeah, okay, so let's imagine that, let me go to, so let's imagine we want to pull the metadata from this org, right? Now, if you're just using Salesforce CLI and not using, VS Code extension pack, I'll come to the VS Code extension pack in a bit here. But let's say you're using just one technique to retrieve the metadata that you want to work with is by creating a chain set or by creating an unpackaged container. Okay, so what is an unpackaged or a package container, right? Package container is, let's say you want to pull some metadata. Let's say I've created an object. Let me create an object here just for showing the use case here. So let's say I want to create an object here. Let's say I'm creating an object called webinar, probably. Create an object. Okay, I'm going to say allow reports. Let's do some things. Let's also create a feed here. Let me call it as unique ID. So this is all I'm doing through the UI because we know that from Salesforce UI, it's very easy to do certain things like creating objects, doing all your declarative stuff, right? I'm going to say here, save it, right? So now I also have a page layout. Let's say I've created a record page. Do I have a record page? Let's pick up a record page here. Let's say record page. Just want to create a record page called webinar page. Webinar. Next. Let's just finish it. Okay, and let's say I want to, let's say I'm doing some work, right? Let's say I'm creating a record page. So let's pull up the record detail. Okay, there's no data, that's why it doesn't show up. Let's just activate it and create some data as well. Sign to the org, desktop, save. Okay, so this is all basic Salesforce stuff that we do in Salesforce. I hope everyone is familiar with it, but if not, there are trailhead modules that you can go and learn about. Okay, so we need a tab as well. Let's create a tab. So that's the power of Salesforce. Like, build applications pretty faster because it allows you to do this via the clicks. So let's say I'm creating a new object called webinar. Let's just pick one of these. Right. So let's save this. So I've created a tab, right, for this webinar. So let's go add some data. Okay. Go. And some webinars here. Random webinar, maybe. Salesforce CLI. Let's put some unique ID. Let's save this. Okay. So yeah, so I added some data, created it. Let's say, okay, that's fine, right? So let's say I have this specific app that I'm building and I want to, sort of retrieve this in, in my local environment so that I can start coding or editing this metadata, directly from Arc. Let's say I'm building a Lightning Web component, right? Today, you cannot build a Lightning Web component in the Arc. You have to build it through, one of the IDEs, right? So that's a use case. Like, let's say we're building an ID, web component, and I no more can work in the Arc. I need the source, right? So one effective way to do that is by going to packages. Let's go to packages. And this technique that I'm showing you, right, applies to unlock packages. It also applies to chain set. Like, you can start building a chain set, adding all your components, and then you can retrieve it by providing the chain set name. And so for time being, right, let's see, I'm building a webinar app. Save it, add. So which was the tab that so always make sure. So one of the properties of packages is, that I keep telling is, always understand the dependency between the metadata, right? Like, for example, that the tabs are the top level element because tabs has dependency on the object. Object has fields, right? And they have page layouts, right? So everything that we have built, we are not going to add one by one. I'm not going to add them one by one. I'm just going to go and say webinar, add, and look at the magic. So it pulled the list view that we accidentally created, I guess. I never created a list view, but there is a list view that got out of the box. There's a unique ID, the field that I created, there's the tab that got created, the object, the page layout, sliding page. Okay, everything is there, right? Fantastic. Now, all that I need to do is retrieve this, right? Retrieve this information. Now, one of the other things is the package that you have created, right? If you delete it, nothing happens. Your metadata is still in the Arc. I can assure you that. And a lot of the folks I talk with, they say, okay, what happens to the when you delete a package? Nothing happens. Your metadata still remains there. Package is a way to tag them, So let's go recreate it. Go to package manager and say webinar app that I'm building, right? Save. That's again add the top level element, right? Because we don't want to go to custom object, add custom object field, etc. Right? So I'm working on webinar. I know that these are all the metadata. I got it, right? Yeah, so now all that I need to do, now how do I get all the metadata in my Arc, right? That's the part of the story you want to tell is, again, Salesforce CLI, because it is powerful, It is connected to my org. It has, capability to access the data from my org. It has capability to create packages, create unlock packages. It has capability to allow me to edit it using any editor. VS Code might not be my my preferred editor, but let's say VS Code is the editor that I want to use. So let's get this done. Okay. So so the command, right, to do that is force source commands. Now, force source commands are designed to work with non-source orgs. So if it was a scratch org, right, I would have easily said force source pull, that would have pulled everything. But if you're not working in a source tracked org. Now let me brief you about what is source tracking. Very important thing. So remember how we had to create this package and add all the things, dependency, etc., and add the thing, right? If you're like working in a scratch org, you need not worry about package and all these things. Like you say for source pull, it will pull all the changes that you have done. And this source tracking is enabled in the scratch orgs and in the developer sandboxes. So if you have developer sandboxes today, right, if you go to the dev hub in your production, you can enable that, and the source tracking gets enabled in the sandbox. From there, it becomes very easy to work on a feature, because all you do is you make the code changes and then say for source pull, it'll pull all the metadata, right? And you can use that to deploy it across various environments. Anyway, so what I'm going to do now is retrieve this, right? Okay, so how do we retrieve this? We do sfdx force source retrieve. Okay, I don't know this command, so I'm going to do a help, right? Now, so this command, right, you can provide the package XML, so you can choose to manually build these things in your org, like the package XML, and provide the path so that you can retrieve all the components, right? That's a long process, right? The other way is to provide the metadata name. Like, for example, I want to retrieve Apex class, so I say Apex class and the class name, and I can retrieve that, right? But wait, I don't want to create package XML. I don't want to handcraft all these things, right? And that's where you see this command which says you can retrieve by the package name. Okay, so that sounds interesting, because I know my package name, right? I know my package name. I can just put the package name and see what happens, right? Let's put the package name here. Let's retrieve. Now it's going to take some bunch of time. Obviously, it shouldn't take much time here. It's taking some time. There you go. Okay, so this is retrieved. So what happened here is, again, as I said, right, it retrieved in the MD API format, right? That's the format that you are used to, if you do not follow the DX format. So it retrieved, and then it ran that convert command to convert that into source format, right? So now if I open the folders, right, if I just refresh and open the folders, right, we should, okay, so yeah, so what it does is actually creates a folder, its own folder with the name of the package. And then you can see the object that we created. You can see the tab that we created. You can see the layouts that we created, all here in the ID. Now I can work. Now one thing, okay, did it not retrieve the field? It seems like it missed the field somehow. That seems like a bug to me. Anyway, so it did not retrieve the field, right? What do? We can easily run one of those commands that to retrieve the field. If I have to retrieve, ideally it should retrieve. I need to check, why it's not retrieving the field information. It should also retrieve the field information. Might be a bug with the CLI conversion process. But again, as I said, one thing, right? So we know this metadata. Now, a lot of you might ask me question of, okay, we know that Apex class, how did you know that Apex class is exactly Apex class like this? How do you know different metadata types, right? So we can describe all the metadata types by using one of those commands. So there's a command to describe all the metadata types. That is you can say MD API, right? And there's a command to describe it and do a help on it, right? Okay, so let's see. And always help, take more help. It's called describe metadata. Say describe metadata, right? Describe metadata, and let's do a help on it. Okay, describe metadata will do the magic of retrieving everything that is there in my org, all the metadata. Again, username you need not provide because we have authenticator and set it as the default, right? Now I want to say I want this thing in a folder. Let's create a folder for it called metadata. Metadata folder. And let's say copy the path because we need the path. So copy this. Let's say I want a file called metadata list.json. I want a JSON file. Okay, so this will get me all the metadata that is there in my org. So you see, it retrieved all the metadata that's there in my org, right? This is all the metadata. Like I was talking about, like, okay, how did we know that Apex class is like exactly named like this, right? So if you choose for Apex class, it gives you the directory. So in your project, right, your directory for Apex class will be named with classes, and the member name is called Apex class. And this is exactly the same thing you use for even package XML construction. Okay, so now let's say we want to retrieve that custom field, right? I want to see what is custom field called. So custom field is called, so it's a child name called custom field. Okay, custom field is called custom field, right? So let's try to retrieve that custom field. How do we do that? Again, go back to the retrieve command, right? And we know that the command has, let's do another help on this because I forgot the command, right? So now retrieve, and then I have M, and I know that this is custom field, right? And what was the name of the field that we missed? I think it was unique ID or something. We just need the field name here. We need the API name. I'll try with the API name first and see. This. Seems like something is happening. It's a no result. Okay, yeah. Seems like something is buggy here. Let's do this. Just retrieve the custom object once more. I want to see what's happening here. What's the name of the object that we saved? Right. Okay, so another command that I remembered with this whole thing, right? So I want to know the exact object name that I have to put, right? So there's also this list command. So let's go look at the list command. So list command, again, it's called MD API list metadata, I guess. List metadata allows you to put the metadata name, right? And I can get that metadata from the describe command, right? And it allows you to sort of say, okay, I want to list the metadata of, let's say, of all the custom object. Custom object here also means standard object. That's unfortunately. Okay, so these are all the objects. Let's just put it into a file. So we can put this into a file with, let's do a help again. I forgot the parameter for the file. Is it, okay, it's called F. F is the, okay, I want to put everything in a file, and the file name or the path will be similar to here. So I'm going to say, as a metadata describe here, copy path, and then say list. Let's call the file name as custom object list. Again, as I said, custom object name. Let's say objects.list. Object dot we'll say object.json. Let's call it as objects list.json. That seems more meaningful. Okay, so now it will write all the names of the objects as well for me. Okay, this is not good formatted. Let's use JSON lint to format JSON so we can look at it better. This gave me all the objects in my org. In fact, you can start building your org data dictionary by running these commands with metadata and whatnot. There's a lot of things you can do with it. So for example, we're looking at the webinar object. Okay, so the object, so we need to provide the full name of the object, which is webinar_c. Let's run the command we had for the object retrieval, right? That run webinar_c. Now, if this also doesn't retrieve, we'll go back to the metadata API commands because I know that will work. Because see again, the way force retrieved, so there it is. It retrieved all the fields, right? So now we should be seeing that, and by default it will retrieve in this directory because I didn't mention the directory, I guess. Let's see. Yeah, by default it retrieved in this directory, but I could easily provide the path in those commands in the retrieve command, right? The retrieve command also has a way to tell the path, so I can provide the path so that it retrieves everything exactly in this folder. So you see the power, right? You see the power of the Salesforce CLI. It allows you to interact with it. You can fetch your metadata. You can create your data dictionary for your projects. You can look at you can basically start operating with a lot of things. Like this pulled all those standard objects as well from my org. So this is how you work with a metadata in Salesforce, and you retrieve and work right now. Here, once it is on my local IDE, right, with VS Code or any other editor, you can work on it. Now, the other thing I want to show you is the Visual Studio Code, right? So Visual Studio Code, now a lot of things I did to the command line, right? But I don't want to type these commands again and again, because you saw, it takes some time to learn, get used to, and type, right? So that's why we have this Visual Studio Code extension plugin. So if you go to Salesforce extension pack, you can download this, right? And it has other things as well, not just the CLI commands that we are talking. It has syntax highlighting, it has code linting, it has auto suggestions. So a lot of things. It's just like your any other IDE. It provides you all those cool capabilities. Like for example, if I was about to sort of create a class, right? Did I have the class? Maybe I'm in the wrong folder. Let's open that folder, this one, right? So let's say I had to create a class, right? So this provides me a class creation command, directly from here, so you can, easily basically create these classes and scaffold it, right? And then it provides, syntax highlighting. It provides all these, code completions that you see here. So there's a lot of things that this does, and that's why we recommend that you have an tool like this. Now, one of the other things that I want to show you here is, okay, so we type so many commands, right? We type so many commands. Now, if you do Command Shift P on VS Code and type SFDX, it gives you almost all the commands that that we work through. Like for example, authorizing the R, creating classes, Visualforce pages, creating templates, creating Visualforce components or deploying them. For example, one of the really good thing is deploying it. Like, you just right click here and say deploy source to org. It runs the same source force deploy command basically that is there in the CLI, right? So this is actually now deploying to the org that I'm connected to. So yeah, so one of the capabilities is obviously deploying, and deploying here you can deploy through like doing this, or you can just click the folder and deploy the whole folder as well. And essentially what you can do is You can also click on this and switch to other arcs. You can authenticate on other Salesforce environments and switch, and then basically deploy the code by one click here. Say deploy source to arc. As long as you are connected to one of the arcs through the Salesforce CLI, you can deploy to that arc as well, right? So yeah. So let's see. We go here, and let's look at Apex class, Apex classes, right? So yeah. So this is the class that I just scaffolded and created, right? So there are commands that you can easily sort of create. I'm over the time. Can I take another 15 minutes, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure, Mohit. I think.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you so much. So yeah, so here's the thing, right? So one of the things is, okay, I'm tired of typing these commands, right? And that's where the power of the Visual Studio Code comes in, because Visual Studio Code, and I encourage you to follow Visual Studio Code documentation, and the release notes specifically. So you go to the VS Code release notes. Just look at the release notes, because every month they release new feature into this IDE, and there's so many things you can do. Obviously one session is not sufficient to actually showcase, but really it has Apex debugger, it has all of the cool features that you need, like debugging, fetching up the logs, running the test classes. That's my favorite feature, like running the test class. Like you have a code, you can just run the test class. Maybe I have an alternate project to showcase all of those. Let's see if I have an alternate project here that I'm working that I might showcase. File, open. Let's open one of the projects that I'm working on, probably. Okay, so this is a project that I'm working on, right? So yeah, so one of the things you can, again, as I said, right, it has all of these cool features. One of the things I like about this is like running the tests, and I can simply go here. Oh, there's no Apex test. Okay, I can run all my, you see here, the Apex test is also there. So I can run all my LWC tests, I can run all my Apex tests, all of these cool features. I can even go to the individual class and run one specific Apex test, So looks like the arc that I'm connected to is sort of expired. But anyways, you can run all these features. It provides you all these cool capabilities. Yeah, so Visual Studio Code thing, right? So one of the features that I want to show you, and this is where you can become like really creative with your, you can go really creative with your, where's this? Let's close this folder, or let's open the folder that we were working on. So you can really get creative here is with task.json, and that's been my favorite find in the in few days here. That I've been liking this task.json thing. So what you can do with task.json is, so you basically create a, sorry, not here. I show this. So you basically create a file called tasks.json. Okay, and let me cheat a bit. Let me use my Gist here to showcase some of the capabilities here. So I have some task.json in my GitHub. So if you go to Gist, you will find them. So let's say, so one of the task.json that I built the other day was, to retrieve metadata from the package, right? So this is like neat little thing that you can put here. So let me explain what it does. So you create your own UI element. So I created a command. So same command, like for source retrieve, right? I don't want to type this command again and again, and put the package name. Instead, I created a command like this, and I binded this input. So I can provide an input, right? So I said input.package name, and the inputs is here, and I chose a prompt type inputs. Now you can go and find about task.json in the VS Code documentation. I'll leave that as an exercise for you all. But yeah, once you create this task.json in your laptop, right? So I'm on Mac, but if you're on Windows, there is a shortcut key called Control-Shift-B. Okay, Control-Shift-B. On Mac, it is Command-Shift-B. So I say Command-Shift-B, it gives me the same command that I built. So for example, retrieving metadata from package, I say that, and I enter the package name here. What's my package name that we built today? Let's go back. What's called? I think it was called webinar app or something. Let's try with that. The webinar app. So yeah, so once you do that, you see, it started executing that command for me. I need not have typed all these commands. Now I can create multiple number of them. I can chain them. So you see, it actually retrieved into this webinar folder, all of the metadata it retrieved, right? So all of the thing that I'm doing, right? You can easily create a task.json for any specific command that is not provided today in the command shift P. So command shift P is for the palette commands that Salesforce extension pack provides. Again, it is all CLI commands that we expose through the Visual Studio Code, right? But for the commands that's not provided, you can build your own task.json so that you don't have to type. You just say command shift B or control shift B, and you see one of them, and you can provide inputs. For some of the commands, there won't be inputs, so you just run them, etc. It's really handy stuff that you can really use it in your day-to-day life. And one of the best parts is if you have like a package.json, right? If you hover over here, it allows you to run the script directly from here. Like for example, if I want to run this linting script, right, I can just hover over it and say run script. It'll run that npm command. So with that, right, with that, I think I pretty much covered what I want to talk about, right? Again, very powerful Salesforce CLI. There's a lot of possibilities with the Salesforce CLI, and one of the use cases is this one, like team-based development, right? You can use scratch arcs, you can use sandboxes, to build your CI/CD pipeline and automated tests, etc. And everything is powered by Salesforce CLI because that provides all the core commands to do that, right? Yeah, a lot of you have asked me, like, how do we decide whether to use a scratch org on sandboxes, right? Or Developer Pro or whatnot, right? So I have this thing, and I'll share this with the group, right? But I generally recommend that if you're on an ISV, you do not have sandboxes, so you go for scratch orgs because you need different type of environments there. But if you are SI, right, you have developer sandboxes. You can turn the source tracking now on those so that you get all those source pull and push commands. So you can use that to essentially do all this development, right? So yeah, so essentially there's different types of sandboxes that we provide and their capabilities. Again, there's no hard and fast rule that you have to use scratch arcs to adopt Salesforce CLI and VS Code extension pack, etc. Because I've shown you today that you need not sort of have those scratch arcs, etc. Like you can use any things like sandboxes. Again, similar thing I showed with the packages, right? You need not be an ISV to use packages. There are techniques like this where you can retrieve metadata, work with the metadata and the arcs. Okay, with that, right? Yeah, these are some of the steps that you can do, right? Enabling Dev Hub, installing this, building from source. Like one of the things I did not show today is building using source code, right? So yeah, you can version this. And the thing about the VS Code is it makes that aspect of it easier because it already has the Git integration. It has a Git integration already baked in. Like for example, if I say a Git init on this project, you'll see that it basically establishes an thing, and then already it pops up saying I have all these local changes to commit to the Git, and I can put the message and commit it directly from here. That's the other capability, source driven development, where you can have a version control like Git or any other tool that you're used to, like VCS or Perforce or anything like that, and you can push your source from here to that specific version control directly from the VS Code. And that's other advantage of VS Code. And it has whole ecosystem of plugins. There's so many plugins. There's now custom plugins, and the community is building more plugins like this. Like I see a lot of plugins these days, like Salesforce Documenter, snippets, toolkits, Sockle editor. There's so many community contributed things here. Okay, so all right, with that, let me take some questions. Yeah, let's take some questions here. Let's see.
Thank you so much, Mohit. I think we have a couple of questions here.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me take the Q&A part first.
Yeah.
Okay. There is one question related to availability of a graphical user interface, executing the CLI commands instead of a command line interface. So is there any option for that?
Graphical. Okay, so that's a good question, right? Like, do we need, right? So graphical command line, community has built a couple of them. Like if you Google now saying, desktop app for Salesforce DX, you will find a couple of them. We don't have anything officially from Salesforce because we focus mainly on VS Code, because that is our graphical line interface. If you go to the VS Code and say Command Shift P, you get all these. You say SFDX, you get all these things, right? Which are essentially what a graphic tool does. So we are focused on doing everything on the on the VS Code itself, rather than like building any other additional tool. We think that VS Code itself is your graphic tool. And again, I showed you something like today with task.json, where you can literally build your own UI pretty quickly. You need not like create your own Electron app or another desktop app for this. You can pretty much build one using task.json, stuff like that.
Yeah, task.json is something